Right now, someone you lost is watching you, not metaphorically, not as a comforting idea your grief invented to help you sleep. Literally, watching you. And according to Edgar Cayce, the man who conducted over 14,000 trance sessions and described the mechanics of the afterlife with a precision that still has no scientific explanation, they don't just see you the way you see another person across a room. They see everything, your emotions, your hidden thoughts, the fears you've never told anyone, the love you never said out loud, the regret you carry every single day. They see all of it. And what Cayce said next, about what the dead actually experience when they look at us, is the part that will stay with you long after this video ends. Stay with me, because in the next few minutes, something is going to shift in how you think about every person you've ever lost. Let's start with what most people assume. Most people, when they think about whether the dead can see us, imagine something like a ghost peering through a window, a faded version of the person they knew, somewhere vaguely above, occasionally glancing down, maybe aware, maybe not, maybe present at funerals and birthdays and weddings, and then gone again. Cayce said that picture is not just incomplete, it's almost entirely wrong. And the reason it's wrong comes down to one fundamental misunderstanding about what consciousness actually is, and what it can do when it's no longer filtered through a physical body. Here is what Cayce described. When you lose your physical body, you lose the limitations that came with it. Your eyes could only see a narrow band of light. Your ears could only catch a fraction of the frequencies around you. Your brain processed information slowly, sequentially, one thing at a time, filtered through fear, filtered through ego, filtered through the fog of physical exhaustion and biological need. All of that, gone. And what remains is consciousness in its unfiltered state. Consciousness that perceives not through organs, but directly, instantly, completely. Cayce described the awareness of a soul that has crossed over as being, in his words, vastly more acute than anything we experience in physical life, not dimmer, not hazier, sharper, more present, more complete. The dead, according to Cayce, don't see less than we do. They see incomparably more. And here is the first detail that stopped me cold when I found it in his readings. The dead don't see your actions, not primarily. What they perceive first, what registers most strongly to a consciousness no longer limited by physical filters, is your emotional state, your vibrational frequency. Cayce described it like this. Imagine if every person you looked at was surrounded by a field of color and light that showed you exactly what they were feeling, not what they were saying, not what they were doing, what they were actually experiencing inside. Joy radiates differently than grief. Fear has a different signature than peace. Love, real love, not performed love, produces a frequency that Cayce said is perceivable across dimensional boundaries in a way that nothing else is. When the people you've lost look at you, the first thing they perceive is not your face, it's your state, your truth, the emotional reality you're carrying right now in this moment. And then Cayce said something that I think about constantly. He said the dead can also perceive your thoughts. Not all thoughts. Not the random mental noise that moves through everyone's mind every day, but the thoughts that carry real emotional weight. The ones you return to. The ones that form the deeper narrative of your inner life. The thought you have about someone you wronged 20 years ago and never made right. The love you feel for a child that is so vast it frightens you. The grief you carry for the person you lost that you've never fully let yourself feel because you're afraid if you start you won't be able to stop. Those thoughts, those weighted, emotionally charged, deeply held inner experiences, Cayce said they are visible to consciousness that has crossed over. As clearly as you can see this screen right now. Now, a real case, because this is where it stops being theory. In the documented archives of the Association for Research and Enlightenment, the organization that preserved and catalogued Cayce's work, there is a reading conducted in the early 1940s for a woman who had lost her husband suddenly. A heart attack, no warning, no goodbye. She came to Cayce consumed by one question that she couldn't release no matter how hard she tried. Did he know in those final moments how much she loved him? Did he know Despite the argument they'd had the week before his death, despite the things said in anger that couldn't be unsaid, did he know the truth underneath all of it? Cayce went into trance, and what came through was this. Her husband was not only aware of her love, he had been aware of it in a way he had never been able to fully perceive while alive. Because in physical life, Cayce explained, we see each other through the fog of our own fears and needs and misinterpretations. We see the surface, we see the behavior, we miss the depth. On the other side of physical life, that fog is gone. Her husband, Cayce said, now perceived the full truth of what she had felt for him across their entire life together. Not just the love she'd shown, the love she'd held back, the love she'd been unable to express, all of it, visible, completely, for the first time. She left that session, according to the notes, unable to speak for several minutes, not from grief, from something that looked like relief so profound it had no name. But now here is the question that follows immediately from all of this. If the dead can see us this clearly, are they always watching? Are they here all the time, present for every moment, every private struggle, every embarrassing Tuesday afternoon? Cayce was careful about this, and his answer is more nuanced than most people expect. He said the souls of those who have crossed over are not tethered to us the way we sometimes imagine. They are not hovering constantly, unable to move on, locked in permanent surveillance of the lives they left behind. That picture, Cayce said, describes the earthbound entity, the soul that couldn't move forward, that got stuck at the boundary between worlds. And that is a very different situation from the soul that crossed over fully and continues its development in higher spheres. For those souls, and Cayce said this is the majority, their awareness of us is not constant. It is chosen, intentional. They come when they are needed, when the emotional frequency of someone they love reaches a pitch that calls to them across dimensional boundaries, when the grief is at its deepest, when the joy is at its most pure, when a decision is being made that will shape the trajectory of a life they care deeply about. They choose to be present for those moments. And in those moments, according to Cayce, their awareness of you is total. And there are things that call them more powerfully than others. Cayce spoke about this specifically. Prayer, directed prayer, conscious communication with someone who has passed, functions by his description as a frequency transmission that crosses dimensional boundaries more reliably than almost anything else. Not because of the words, because of the intention and emotional charge behind them. When you speak to someone you've lost, genuinely speak, not perform, not go through motions, but actually direct your consciousness toward them with real emotional weight. Cayce said they receive it, every time, without exception. The signal crosses. He also spoke about dreams, and what he said about dreams is the part that will change how you sleep tonight. Cayce described sleep as the one state in which the boundary between the living and the dead becomes naturally thinner. Not eliminated, but thinner. In sleep, the conscious mind releases its grip on the rigid consensus reality it maintains during waking hours. The filters lower, and in that state, contact becomes possible in a way it simply isn't when you're fully awake and defended. Cayce said, many of the dreams people have of deceased loved ones, the ones that feel different from ordinary dreams, the ones that feel vivid and real in a way that stays with you for days, are not the brain's own creation. They are actual contact, the soul of the person you lost entering the frequency of your sleeping consciousness and communicating through the only language available in that state, image, emotion, symbol. He said the dreams where a deceased person appears completely calm, completely at peace, and says something simple, something that feels less like a dream dialogue and more like a direct message, those are the ones to pay the most attention to. Because those, Cayce said, are usually real. And here is the second real case. A man came to Cayce after the death of his son. The son had died young, an accident, and the father was destroyed by one specific and relentless thought, that his son had died afraid. That in the final moments there had been terror, and that terror was the last thing his son experienced, and that knowledge was eating the father alive from the inside. He had been having dreams of his son, but he dismissed them as his own mind generating what he wanted to see. He didn't trust them. He came to Cayce asking for something he could trust. In trance, Cayce described the son's experience of the final moments in detail that the father had never shared with anyone. The specific quality of light in the room, the exact sequence of what the son perceived as awareness, shifted. And then Cayce said something about the son's emotional state in those moments that caused the father to stand up from his chair. Not terror. The son had not experienced terror. According to Cayce's reading, the transition had happened so quickly and so completely that what the son experienced was closer to surprise, and then an immediate sense of expansion so vast and so unexpected that terror had no room to exist. The father asked how he could know this was real and not something Cayce was generating to comfort him. Cayce said, "Ask your son in a dream tonight and tell him you want to know something only the two of you would know." The father came back 3 days later. He didn't explain what had happened in the dream. He just said, "I believe you." And he never came back to ask another question about his son's death, because he didn't need to. Now, what do the dead want from us? Because this is the part that Cayce returned to again and again across thousands of readings. And it is the part that most of us get completely wrong. We assume, because grief is what we feel, that the dead must share our grief, that they must be sad about being gone, that they must miss us the way we miss them. Cayce said this assumption, as understandable as it is almost entirely backwards. The souls of those who have crossed over fully, who have moved beyond the boundary and entered higher spheres of existence, do not experience loss the way we do, because loss, as we experience it, is rooted in separation. And from the perspective of a consciousness that can perceive you directly, that can feel your emotional state as clearly as you feel your own heartbeat, that can be present with you in the moments that matter most, there is no separation, not in the way we imagine it. What they experience, Cayce said, is closer to a deep, ongoing care, a continued investment in the people they loved, a desire, not desperate, not anguished, but real and steady, for those people to be well, to be whole, to continue living fully rather than stopping at the point of loss. And here is the thing Cayce said that I think about every time I hear someone say they can't move on after losing someone they loved. He said, "Your grief, real, deep, unprocessed grief, does not honor the person you lost. It holds them. It creates an energetic tether between your pain and their continued development." He was not saying don't grieve. He was not saying the loss is not real or the pain is not valid. He was saying the person you lost does not want to be the reason you stopped living. They do not want their absence to become a wall between you and everything that is still possible. What they want, what Cayce said, they communicate again and again in dream contacts, in signs, in the subtle pressures people feel at crossroads moments, is simple. Keep going, not away from them, forward, with them still present in a different form, still watching, still caring, still there, in the moments that matter, in a way that doesn't require a body to be real. The signs Cayce described are not dramatic. They are not lightning bolts or faces in clouds. They are small, precise, personally calibrated to the person receiving them, a song that appears in an impossible context at the exact moment you needed to hear it. An object moved, a light that flickers at a moment of crisis with no electrical explanation, a smell, a perfume, a tobacco, a specific cooking scent that arrives in a room with no physical source, a thought that arrives in a voice that is not your own, carrying information you couldn't have generated yourself. Cayce said, these are not coincidences, and they are not the grieving mind manufacturing comfort. They are the dead using every available channel to bridge the gap between where they are and where you are, because the gap from their side is not as large as it looks from yours, and they are in their own way working constantly to make it smaller. One final question, and I want you to sit with this rather than answer it immediately. Has there been a moment since you lost someone when something happened that you couldn't explain? Something small, something that no one else would understand if you tried to describe it, something that made you feel, just for a second, that the distance between you and that person was not as absolute as death had made it seem. Most people have at least one of these moments. Most people dismiss them, because the alternative, that they were real, is almost too much to hold. Cayce would say, don't dismiss them. He would say, those moments are not your imagination protecting you from grief. Those moments are the truth breaking through the only way it currently can. And the person you lost is on the other side of that moment, watching you decide whether to believe it. Write in the comments, have you felt it? A presence, a sign, a dream that was different from other dreams, because you are not alone in this. And neither, according to everything Edgar Cayce spent his life trying to tell us, are they?